I may have found my favorite Marvel Legends retro figure in the most unexpected place. Check it out. Hey folks, David here with another Marvel Legends, and it's probably, or arguably, for my favorite figure that I've gotten from this new Marvel Legends retro line yet. I know, it's crazy, considering that this is Cyborg Spider-Man. It's supposed to be an alternate version of Spider-Man from, I believe, Earth 616, where he's got a couple of augmentations up his sleeve, quite literally on his left sleeve there. And it's crazy because this is most definitely not based off the animated series, as you can tell from a little bit of the aesthetic look of Spidey with the enlarged eyes, the different symbol on his chest, the different overall look of his costume. But most definitely I would say it's probably the physique and the molding of the caricature of Spidey here that is much beefier in terms of muscle definition and overall physique. That's generally a little bit different than that of animated Spidey. It's more of a comic book combination of maybe Ultimate Spidey with some classic Spidey mixed in there, but he is meant to mimic the look of Cyber Spidey or Cyborg Spidey. And because of that, I was not expecting to really like this figure because he's not like the most purest form of the Spider-Man character. I would have preferred a much more superposable general Spider-Man from the animated series. And I know that there's one floating out there, except he goes for like $150. So in the most recent retro line, we've gotten the Cyborg Spidey. However, I've ended up liking him a whole lot more than I was coming to grips with as I played with him more, because he's definitely a very sturdy figure. Again, he's got the bulkier muscle definition, and I was expecting that to kind of turn me away, but as I played with him, as I kind of looked at him and marveled at his posability and at his actual general look, I've actually accustomed myself to liking him more than I was expecting myself to do, even more so than even Armored Spider-Man or Spider Armor Mark 1 like I've covered previously. And because of that, he definitely feels a bit more distinguished in that figure. I would even argue that Hasbro may have used some kind of template or blueprint from a prior Spider-Man figure that was different than that of the Mark 1 Spider Armor version. Although I might need some clarification on the hole on his back. I can only assume that this is meant to be pegged in by some kind of display stand, but he didn't come with one, which begs me to believe that maybe this is in fact our indicator that some pieces of this model in particular are kind of reuses of a previous design. If by any chance any of you know, let me know in the comments below if it's true, and if it is, then what figure does this guy derive from? And how can I get it? But aside from the muscle, you can see that he's also got a couple of enhancements, most notably the arm here with the little shield plating on the top of the shoulder. Then you have, of course, little characteristics with the molding that makes it look like a cybernetic arm. I would argue that in terms of feel and quality of plastic, the arm is actually my least favorite part. It feels a little bit on the cheaply side as far as look and feel and the quality of the plastic. I don't know what it is, but there's something about the cybernetic arm that just kind of feels separated. I know that's meant to be kind of the purpose, because it's meant to be like its own artificial piece in terms of the character, but in figure form, it also feels like a whole different company made it, as opposed to the actual quality of plastic for the remainder of the Spidey figure, which is built really brick solid, and he feels like a very legitimate, awesome quality figure. Amongst that, of course, there's some great paint decal as far as the actual paint of the costume, the look of the character, and even on some of the other touches, such as the little white bands around the thigh here, which is actually removable. You can actually kind of slide it down and remove it off the leg completely. So if you want to swap it for one leg versus the other, based on your preference, you can actually do that as well. Sadly, the case is not the same for the headband. As far as I can tell, it's grafted onto the headpiece, so that's not going to be removable, but it is flexible, made out of that rubbery kind of plastic. It doesn't really stay down. I was kind of hoping it would be posable somewhat, where you can kind of rotate it in place and have the straps back here, the loose straps, be aiming down or up depending on your choice. But sadly, that is not the case. As you can kind of see right there, they kind of revert back to their original position up towards the sky there. kind of giving it like that flying look. So it helps in terms of poses that you want to put him in, dynamic poses. But if he's going to be in a neutral stance, it kind of looks like it's just kind of flinging there. So just kind of food for thought there. However, that leads us to the head sculpt, which again, for the most part, kind of takes inspiration from the ultimate look of Spidey with the enlarged lens that you can see, because the other one is actually covered up by a cybernetic kind of monocle to kind of give him a much more apocalyptic feel. Along with that, you kind of scan down the body and you notice that one other little detail stands out, which is this Batman-like-ish, and I'm not just saying that because this is a Batman and Spider-Man-centric channel, but I mean, come on, look at that utility belt and tell me that doesn't resemble Batman somewhat. But he comes with his own little pouch right there for some added augmentations that he could probably pull out of his belt there in case he ever needs it up against certain enemies. But those are the only other qualities that kind of stand out from this general looking Spidey that still, again, caught me off by surprise because of the way that he's built and also the way that he's articulated. And it's through this articulation that I feel like there's something about this figure different from the Spider Armor one. Let me demonstrate. We got the head. So there is a natural ball joint at the top that allows rotation 360 degrees. However, if you kind of look a little closely or just simply rotate the figure towards the back, you'll notice that he actually has an additional joint, a vertical cut one, that allows the head to be able to move up and down very, very freely. In fact, if you move it downwards, it's a little on the stiffer side, but he's able to pretty much crunch in his head almost all the way into his chest as so, or move it upwards about that. Oh my god, this is arguably the most vertically articulated Spidey head or action figure head, even with the McFarlanes I've covered thus far. One of the most articulated head joints I've actually really tackled on this channel. So this is a genuine surprise. This is actually quite outstanding. A little bit of tilt to the left or to the right. A little bit more could have been desired on that ball joint, but it makes up for it in that vertical joint that I was just, like I said, not coming to expect on a figure such as this. And even that goes even double down to the shoulders. The shoulders have this joint. Now, I know that a lot of other Marvel Legends have already had this. This may be old hat for a lot of you, but for me, this, again, is catching me by surprise because I've been kind of disenfranchised from the Marvel Legends series, and because of me just kind of jumping back into the fray here, this is just newfound territory for me. And that is the shoulder joints here, which of course have the natural ball joint at the top of the shoulder, as you see right there, that allows movement 360 degrees, as well as slight extension to the sides. It's a little bit on the stiffer side, but then, hold up a minute, you got an extra piece in there, you can kind of see it right there, that allows extension to the far back as much as that a ways, and then as much front about that much forward. So that is insane. You can actually extend the arm to the front and to the back horizontally rather than vertically, much better than any of the past figures I've covered on the channel so far. Like I said, this is brand new to me, and I'm actually quite tickled pink by that. And the same could be repeated over here on the cybernetic arm, except not as fluidly, only because of the way that, again, the plastic for the cyber arms feels a little bit on the cheaper side. I don't know what it is, but that's just how it kind of comes across, as well as this additional cyber piece or panel, solar panel, whatever it's called, this little shield plating that it's got going on the top of the shoulder does kind of limit a little bit of the arm movement. As you can see, extension towards the sides is a little limited because of this. It just kind of gets in the way. But if you do move it out of the way vertically, then you could see a little bit more of that vertical fluctuation of the joint 360 degrees, as well as slight movement towards the back thanks to that additional shoulder joint inside, and then more so forward, as you can see right there. So that is quite ridiculous. It's not only ridiculous that this comes with in this figure, but that more figures, especially sought after figures, don't throw this in by default, whether they be Marvel Legends or anything on the DC Direct McFarlane line. I mean, it should definitely be considered. That's all I'm saying. Then we get to the bicep swivel, which is present on both arms, as you can see right there. Of course, that's going to be a little tougher on the cybernetic arm because of the way that it's built, especially with these little cylindrical pieces on the bicep muscle. But it is present there. Then two joints on each elbow that allow full bending of the elbow about Now I want to say beyond the 90-degree angle, I want to safe to say about 120, 130 degrees-ish or so. You can see right there, kind of bending fully all the way up into his chest. And then, of course, he's got wrist joints that allow full rotation, 360 degrees, as well as vertical cuts similar to that of the neck. But of course, like we demonstrated also with the Mark 1 spider armor, he can also bend the wrists in that vertical cut joint about that far in as well as that far out. It's a little stiffer on the fist hand, but we'll get into the much more free-flowing hand for wrist articulation once we cover accessories. Then the torso, similar to that of the spider armor, that again was a very welcome surprise, was that kind of hinge joint here in the middle that is ratcheted, so you can hear it very clearly snap into this crunching position. But then he could also snap backwards for this kind of vertical towards the back extension that he's got going on right there, as well as a horizontal cut for horizontal movement, 360-degree movement of the waist. That's actually below the utility belt, so just keep that in mind. Then we get to the legs. Okay, this little white band is actually coming off much easier than I thought it would. I'm going to go ahead and remove it here for the sake of the articulation demonstration, if you will. And then we get to the top leg joints, as mentioned before. We're going to be able to move them about that far forward, as well as only about that much back, only because of the way the ass is sculpted there. But he can extend both legs towards the sides, as you see right about right there, before we get some hesitance. Thigh swivels are present once more that allow full rotation, 360 degrees, as well as the knees bending at 2 points all the way back. A little bit on the ratcheted side, but of course that's always welcome. What is also very welcome is that not only do we get thigh cuts here at the top for horizontal movement, this time around we got shin cuts right above the boot here that allow 360-degree movement for not only the shins themselves, but of course the angles in case you ever want to move the feet all the way across on a vertical axis. On a horizontal axis. And that's very welcome because much like Spider Armor Mark 1, the ankles are molded in that way that I just was not really realizing or trying to grab a hold of in terms of the idea behind these ankles, because like I mentioned in that Spider Armor Mark 1 video, these ankles can bend all the way down to the bottom like so, as well as flex all the way up like so, but they can't move horizontal unless you bend them all the way down, then they can fully rotate. So they got that similar issue that Spider Armor Mark 1 had. However, in a matter of speaking, this issue is somewhat rectified by the inclusion of the shin cuts right above right there. So if you ever want to be able to pose him in a way to cover more ground with his feet, you can now do so thanks to those cuts. So if we can just get some more Marvel Legends figures to incorporate that, that would be greatly appreciated, because that'd be awesome. Okay, I think I've twisted and bended Spidey here enough. Let's go ahead and put back that leg brace here just so that he can kind of apply a little bit of pressure on there to make sure that it's not too stressed out and the muscles are clearly relaxed and compressed. So let's make sure that Spidey here is relaxed. Now, I covered the articulation for pretty much every appendage that he's got going on right here, including the cybernetic one. But I mentioned before that on this hand right here, it's a little stiff to get that vertical joint to work up and to move up and down. That's because he does come with an additional web spinning hand, and as you can see, the web spinning hand does have that vertical cut to be able to move up and down like the other hand. And much like with Spider Armor Mark 1, you can remove his natural hand, not the cybernetic one, because the cybernetic one is stuck in the punching position. There's no replacement for that one, but simply giving a tug on the fist hand, which is actually stuck on there quite well. Oh my god, I even hit the camera. But then you could take the web spinning hand and just prop it back into its position. By default, he comes with the web spinning hand, but I felt like for the sake of the review, I'd start with the fist one, because then it's kind of uniformal with the cybernetic one and it looks a little bit better on camera to start off things with. So now, as you can see right there, he's got the web spinning hand on the right, and therefore, of course, trademark Spidey, you can pose him in a variety of ways to make him look like he's spinning a web. Speaking of which, frankly, I don't know what was the necessity for this. I guess maybe just to fill in accessory quota, but Hasbro did in fact throw in a web strand with Cyborg Spidey here. The only reason why I'm a little confused is because though the molding and the texture detail of the webbing itself is not too bad, it does the serviceable job, it's just that each end here is sculpted in a way that I just kind of don't really see being very practical here with Cyborg Spider-Man, because one end has this kind of loop around that maybe it can kind of go around one of his hands, or if you want to work it the way. So far, all of the webbing accessories that Marvel Legends has thrown in with their retro line have been a little questionable. And much like with Mark 1 Spider Armor, the webbing here is no different, because one end you can maybe put it in one of his wrists to make it look like he's spinning the web, or maybe with his fist hand it looks like he's grabbing on hold to it on this end, because the other one is coiled into itself like this. And for dynamic purposes and posability purposes, maybe it comes across a little bit better if he's in the right pose, but as it stands, I'm kind of torn on whether or not there's proper utilization of this web strand. So I'm just going to go ahead and put it off to the side and let Spidey speak for himself. And though maybe a little bit of the feeling of the plastic on the legs feels a little weird as I try to pose them, the amount of articulation and detail they threw in on the natural parts of Spidey here, save for the cybernetic arm that I personally feel feels a little bit on the tacky side, I am actually completely blown away by how much I ended up liking the Spidey figure. More so than I had any expectation or anticipation for me to be, because as I saw him on the product pages and even in store, I thought to myself, I would rather just have a natural looking Spidey, an actual pure, straight from the animated series Spidey. And this most definitely is not from the animated series, as you can tell from the aesthetic look of the character. This is more so on the Ultimate side. Plus the augmentations from him being the Earth 616 version. He's gonna have all these modular things about him, and yet as an action figure, I almost quickly fell in love with him, save for the weird web accessory or the cybernetic arm. This is honestly one of my favorites, and it probably trumps the Armor Mark 1 Spider Armor thus far. Of course, we still have a couple of more Marvel Legends that I'm hoping to tackle here on this channel in the very near future, so if you guys want to stay tuned for those, make sure to hit the subscribe button down below, turn on notifications, and if you guys want to add your own Cyborg Spider-Man to your collection, be sure to use the affiliate links in the description. It helps out the channel a great deal. I appreciate you guys for sticking all the way to the very end for the video, and as always, stay humble. I'll see you on the next one.